One of the famous stories about you is the fact that you made a cold call to a person by the name of Ray Kroc a few years after you started. Would you tell us about how that came and what happened after you made that call?
Well, actually, it was a cold phone call I made to Ray Kroc about a year after I joined Cooper in the small public relations firm. So we've had the McDonald's account now for around 49 years this year, but who's counting? But I did make a cold phone call to him. He had a very small office here in Chicago at LaSalle and Wacker. Somebody told me about this fledgling little company he was starting. It just had a handful of the old red and white tile McDonald's. And when I called him up, he said, "Come on over." So I went right over there. And after about a half hour, he said, "Okay, start Monday." And I told him our fee at that time was $500 a month. That was our going rate.
What did you pitch to him that he bought? What services did you say you were going to do for him?
Well, at that point, when they were so small, and I knew they were planning on opening quite a bit all over the country, I thought that public relations would be an economical way for them to get his story told. They couldn't afford national advertising, and they really couldn't afford any advertising of any kind at that point. So the first thing I told him that I thought we could be helpful in him selling franchises because that was his key consideration. So we tried to tell the story of how successful some of the existing franchisees were and how good investment this was for certain people to get into it. Now, when I say an investment, I don't mean just a monetary investment because they never took people as investors. You had to really get involved and work, be a working franchisee.
But you then helped select the media that were used, and actually, were you doing this all on your own, writing the stories?
Well, yeah, I was doing everything in those days. It was I used to write the releases and type them and myself on an old Smith Corona and then deliver them to the media and try to sell the stories to media around the country. But so it was kind of it wasn't quite a one-man band, but it was pretty close to it.
What caused you to come up with the idea that you and I guess Ray hatched together of having a trust bank, what you called a trust bank? You coined the term, I believe.
Yeah, I did coin that term years ago, where this trust bank would be akin to building up deposits of goodwill in case you needed it later on. And I think that it was sort of confounded people in those days because McDonald's was such a small company selling 15-cent hamburgers, and getting involved in the community was not exactly the kind of thing that you expected them to do. It was more expected of banks and major companies like utilities and things like that who got really involved in the community.
Was this a tough thing to sell to the franchisees, or the organization support this idea right from the beginning?
Well, it was kind of an easy sell in that sense because Ray Kroc had a very big interest in public relations. He had a flair for it, if you will. He was one of he was sort of a public relations person's dream. If you told him he had to go to Muncie, Indiana for an interview, he'd say, "Okay, what time do we leave?" Because he had a great feeling for it. So sometimes you can have, great ideas for clients, but if they're not receptive, it doesn't mean anything. But he was always receptive from day one. He just felt good about it. And I think he came from a theatrical background. He was a musician, and he ran a radio station for a while in Chicago in the early days. Hired Amos and Andy as with their first jobs, and so he had this kind of flair for it. So I think he was an easy sell from that standpoint.
Did he have at that time, or did McDonald's have at that time, any kind of a internal public relations staff?
No.
You were the sole.
No, we were the inside and the outside, if you will, because they really are so small they couldn't have any of those things. Their I started to say earlier, maybe in my talk about how we got started, there was a man named Sonneborn who was his Croc's partner, who was the financial
Right.
guy with the company. Ray was sort of the Mr. Salesman, if you will, and but Sonneborn was the financial brains behind the company and the man who came up with the real estate concept, which really made sense for them. And Sonneborn hated the idea that Ray Kroc hired us because when Ray brought him in that morning, when I came over to his office, he hit the ceiling and said, "What are you hiring a public relations firm for? You and I can't even afford to draw salaries." So for the first couple of years, I ducked every time I saw Sonneborn. I didn't want to remind him of the $500 a month he was spending.
When did the idea of the Ronald McDonald houses, and how did that come about?
Well, the
begin?
Ronald McDonald House program started in Philadelphia about 30 years ago. The local McDonald's franchisees were approached by the Philadelphia Eagles football team. The Eagles had a player whose daughter had leukemia, and the player told everybody what a hard time it was for families of seriously ill children because they had no place to stay around the hospitals. And a lot of them couldn't afford to stay in hotels. So that whole concept of building a house near a major children's hospital where parents and the children themselves could stay while they were being treated came about. So it started there, and then the local franchisees around St. Patrick's Day decided to devote the proceeds of Shamrock shakes, milkshakes, to be devoted to building this house. And sales were so good that the house was built in a very short period of time. So I went to go look at this house in the when it first opened, and I thought it was such a good idea that I recommended to the company that they expand the idea, and you could open these houses, I thought, in almost every major city. So while I certainly can't take credit for creating the concept, which I didn't do, but I did recommend that they go national, and never dreaming it would be even international. They would open in Moscow and Tokyo and Stockholm and Brazil and wherever. But that's how really the whole concept started.
Did you equate this with being part of the trust bank and taking something out, or was there a relationship that you saw between the two?
Oh, absolutely. I thought it was a natural for, I think, and still to this day, I think clients will come to us and will say, well, give us a Ronald McDonald House idea. And those things are not easy to come by. It would be very easy if you could manufacture this thing. But it absolutely fit the bill as far as the statement about their involvement in the community, because it was so important for McDonald's to become part and parcel of the local community. And what better way to illustrate that, by having your name on the door, if you will, too, of all these houses. So it really has been a very heartwarming experience in many ways.
Now, just to shift gears here a little bit, and you may have to really scratch your head to find an answer to this next question, but what was the biggest challenge you faced during your career to date?
Biggest challenge in terms of a client, you mean, or in
Client
anything?
or
Anything.
anything you might have found that really tested your ability to solve the problem?
Well, sometimes we're now owned by another company,
Right.
as many firms are these days, where they're larger companies that own advertising agencies and promotion agencies and related kinds of companies. And that's a challenge because we like to separate ourselves from that, if you will, and retain what we think we've built up over the years. So probably the biggest challenge is to retain the culture that we've built up and not be sublimated by the parent company. And that's a constant thing that we go through, and I think they respect that and have given us that opportunity. And I know from other people in the industry, they don't quite get that, and so there's a terrific amount of stress sometimes in connection with that of being owned by somebody else, and that's always a challenge after starting a business and being your own person in trying to retain what you have built up over the years, and yet you want to grow and you want to utilize all the other things that they might offer. So again, it's that balancing act that's so important. But it's probably maybe one of the major challenges I can think of.
Well, I think that's an exceptionally good answer because it causes me to ask you a follow-up question to that, and that is, it seems like that the advertising agencies or some of the major advertising agencies are the acquirers of bona fide public relations firms like yourself. And I'm not sure whether that's a healthy thing or not to have the advertising as a specialty be the acquirer as opposed to public relations, which I would perceive as be more all-encompassing than advertising. So how does you deal with that kind of perceptions like that people would have?
Well, it is, as I said earlier, a challenge to separate the two, if you will. And I think that the smart ones, who are the parent companies, realize that it is a different kind of business. And you can't generalize about it as you can running, a promotion agency or something of that nature. That we do have a unique kind of business, and they respect that. Hopefully, you've convinced them, or you've given them enough reason to say, I'm doing fine, I'm doing well, don't tamper with this. I think, as I say, I think the smart ones will respect that and leave you alone and try to have you retain what you do best.
We talked a little bit about or you did, about the challenges that you confronted, and one of the major ones. What challenges do you see facing the what would be known as the public relations profession or other executives today, and how do the challenges that you are about to identify, how can they be resolved or met?
Well, I think that we might have a tendency today with all this technology to overreact and try to take out the human element out of the whole thing. And I think that's a danger. Technology changes, as we all know, so fast that, who would have predicted, these things happening. I was supposed to give a talk, and I'm still supposed to give a talk soon about the next 50 years in public relations. And I'm reminded of the guy who gave a talk, I don't know, about 10 years ago, who predicted there'd be helicopter pads on every major building in the United States. Well, obviously it didn't happen. So I think that you can overreact to things and be influenced by this to a dangerous extent. And I don't mean I want to turn the clock back on a lot of things, because I would like to in many cases, but there is no turning the clock back. That I think that newspaper readership is going to be almost decimated in the next 10, 20 years. And I hate to see that, because I've been such a great proponent of that since I was a kid. And I've always been kind of a news junkie. And I just hate to see something like the newspapers die out. And I do see that they're having so many problems. Young people just aren't reading them. And it's true, you can get things online almost everywhere you go, but it's not the same. So it's again, not letting technology rule everything. To try to keep the human element is going to be an extremely important thing for all of us.
I want to come back to that subject in a little bit, but I wondered about, in the area of challenges, whether you were bothered by public relations being associated with spinning or PR being used as pejorative terms, and if that bothers you at all, the general connotation that public relations sometimes generates, or if you have ideas or ways that you think that that can be overcome, or whether it should just be ignored.
Well, I am still bothered by the term being put down by a lot of people who don't know anything about the business we're in. We'll even hear, perish the thought, certain clients say, give us some of that PR stuff, you know, and and I said, what do you mean, lie, or spin or lie, right? But I think that's a real danger of our, you know, of the business, and I don't think we have to be so thin-skinned that we can't handle that, but I do feel that we have to respond wherever we do hear that kind of thing, because there are still a lot of people around who don't know what we do in our business and still think that we buy advertising or create advertising, and so it's a constant educational job. But I must say it's a lot better than it was. Obviously, things have evolved. It used to be, too, when public relations would be the first thing cut, when budgets were curtailed, and companies would say, well, where do we have it? You know, where can we cut down? It was always public relations before advertising and before almost anything else. But today we found that even in times when the economy is soft, public relations still does well, and I think that their companies are more sophisticated now. They realize they do need it, and I think many of them need it for the maybe, or think they need it for the wrong reasons, because they've seen things happen when they didn't have good public relations, or they've seen, you know, a president like Nixon go down, you know, because of some of those things. So, and companies like the Enrons and the WorldComs in trouble. So sometimes I think that has benefited public relations in the sense that people realize that they need good public relations in order to combat those things and ward those things off.